Portland cement concrete. Strong, durable. It's the backbone of the nation's interstate system. But no road lasts forever. In concrete, problems usually develop first along the joints. Getting these areas repaired quickly will help the road from developing bigger problems. So in this program, we'll look at the procedures for making spall repairs. Basically, there are 9 steps. Marking the area, saw cutting, excavating, cleaning, placing joint material, coating with epoxy to bond the new concrete to the old, placing concrete, finishing, and curing. But before we get to all the details, you should know that spalls can develop just about anywhere. And when they develop close together, you have to consider joining them together. Here you see 2 spalls that are within 2 feet of each other. In this case, they should be combined and treated as one spall. Obviously, the area between them won't support 2 separate repair areas. If the spalls are farther than 2 feet apart, like they are here, they should be treated as 2 separate repair areas. Here, 2 spalls are on opposite sides of the joint. They should be treated as 2 separate repairs also. That's because the joint has to be continuous across the pavement. Never patch across a joint. One more thing before we get to the repair procedures. Although it's not your responsibility to schedule the work, be aware that the temperature that day should be above 45 degrees, and freezing conditions should not be expected within the next 3 days. Concrete won't set properly if it's too cold. Okay, now let's look at the first step, marking the repair. The whole idea here is to determine the extent of the damage. So drag a hammer across the damaged area and listen for a hollow sound. That indicates bad concrete. You can also check the damage by tapping the concrete with the hammer. Again, listen for the difference in sound. A hollow sound indicates concrete that needs repair. But what if traffic noise makes hearing impossible? Well, there's one more procedure you can use. Just place some small stones on the concrete and hammer around them. If the concrete is good, the stones will stay undisturbed. If the concrete is bad, the stones will jump. Now, before you mark the area, it's important to remember that transverse joints do not form 90-degree angles with the longitudinal joints. Instead, they are skewed to provide better load transfer from one slab to the next. So mark the repair at a skew to run parallel to the transverse joints. When you mark the area, be sure to use a straight edge so the saw cuts will be as straight as possible, and mark at least 2 inches beyond the extent of the damage. This is important because it's difficult to see exactly where the saw is cutting. You need a mark to follow beyond the point where the saw cuts intersect. Remember, the cuts have to cross each other completely, so the corners of the repair will be the right depth. And that brings us to the next step of spall repair, cutting along the marked area with a concrete saw. The maximum depth for a spall repair along the joint is 4 inches. There's not enough pavement left below 4 inches to ensure a good patch. There's also a minimum distance. Cut at least 1.5 inches into the spall. A patch less than 1.5 inches won't hold. Measure the cut if you have any doubt about how far down you've gone. Again, saw beyond the point where the marks intersect so that the corners of the repair will be the same depth as the rest of the repair. Next, break up the concrete with a chipping hammer, working toward the saw cuts. Chip only to the depth of the saw cuts and make the bottom of the repair as smooth and level as you can. Remove all the loose materials and sweep out the area. This is what the spall should look like at this point. The walls should be smooth and vertical. If the walls are damaged, remark and recut the area. The area is now ready to be cleaned. As you know, if there's any dust, the new concrete won't adhere to the old. The first step in the cleaning process is air blasting. This removes most of the loose material left in the spall. After cleaning the spall with the air blast, take a screwdriver and clean out the debris left in the saw cut. If any material is left in the saw cuts, the repair won't be effective, and a new spall will soon appear, making your work now a big waste of time. The next part of cleaning is sandblasting. This removes any remaining joint sealant and aids in adhesion. When you finish sandblasting, there will still be residue to be removed. It's important to remember to air blast the spall again. Make it as clean as possible. With the cleaning process ended, the next step involves filling the saw cuts with epoxy. Mix the epoxy with epoxy hardener. Read and follow the manufacturer's recommendations and time requirements for a proper mix. Fill the caulking tubes with the epoxy mix. Using a caulking gun, fill the saw cuts evenly and uniformly with epoxy. The next step is extremely important. The joint material must be replaced where necessary in order to allow for concrete's natural tendency to contract and expand. This can be done by installing cardboard cut to fit along the side of the joint. The next step also involves the epoxy resin. This time it is not mixed with the hardener, but is coated directly to the old concrete on the bottom and sides of the spall. Be sure that the coating is uniformly distributed so that the new concrete will adhere throughout the repair. Next, place concrete in the spall after the walls are coated with epoxy and are still tacky. Fill the entire patch area with concrete. Insert the vibrator quickly to consolidate the concrete. Over-vibrating causes segregation and makes the patch weak. Next, strike the excess concrete and finish the concrete patch, making it smooth and flush. Try to match it to the existing surface. For example, if there's a wheel rut in the pavement, there should be a wheel rut in the patch. Ideally, motorists should not feel a bump or a depression. Next, give the concrete patch a final finishing and texturing. It's important to texture it to provide skid resistance and to help drainage. Finally, spray a thin but uniform curing compound on the concrete. This keeps the concrete from drying out. Let it sit for at least 3 hours before allowing traffic to pass over it. And that's the procedure for spall repair. To review, examine the standard drawings to be sure that spalls are combined only when necessary. Sound the concrete to determine the size of the spall. Mark the area at least 2 inches from the damaged concrete so that all the damaged concrete is removed. Saw cut parallel to the joints and make sure the cuts cross each other completely at the corners. Carefully chip away and remove the concrete to the depth of the saw cut. Clean the spall by air blasting, picking out loose material from saw cuts, sandblasting, and air blasting again. Fill the saw cuts with epoxy mix. Concrete won't fill them, and we don't want another spall to have to repair later. Place cardboard in the joints so the concrete can expand and contract unharmed. Coat the spall uniformly with epoxy resin to ensure a good patch. Place concrete to fill the spall. Vibrate quickly to avoid segregation. Finish and texture the concrete, matching it to the existing pavement. And finally, spray the concrete with a curing compound to keep it from drying out, and let it sit for at least 3 hours before allowing traffic on it. As I said in the beginning of the program, concrete is the backbone of our interstate system. It runs the complete length and width of our state. If we take time to do these repairs early and correctly, we'll get the longest life possible from this tremendous investment. Expands and contracts as it freezes and thaws. And before long, cracks and potholes. So water is the major cause of potholes. Try to keep that in mind in any road maintenance activity. It's just as important to prevent these problems as it is to fix them. Okay. Now let's look at the procedures to follow in making a permanent patch. Pothole patching has one thing in common with all other maintenance activities, and that is that it has to be done safely. So be sure to discuss traffic control with your foreman before you head out to the job. Keep in mind that no matter what signs and devices are called for, you should always wear the proper clothing. An orange U-dot hat and an orange shirt, jacket, or safety vest. The procedures you'll see here are based on the department's maintenance handbook. Of course, potholes come in all shapes and sizes, and the handbook can't cover everything. So the more you know about patching, the better the job will be.